Every morning began the same way: silence, routine, and a photograph he refused to take down. No one in this town knew who he used to be, and in 7 days, everyone would find out.
She had rehearsed the words 100 times in her car, but nothing prepares a mother for asking a stranger to become someone he is not, even for a single day. One request, one day. No explanation offered, until he asked the only question that mattered: why?
For one day, he would answer to a name that was not his. For one day, a little girl would believe the world was whole again. He thought he had buried that part of his life for good. But some truths do not stay hidden. They wait for the right stranger to knock.
If you have ever wondered whether a stranger's kindness could rewrite the course of two broken families, stay with this story until the very end. Because what happened between a tired single father and the daughter of a woman he had never met will remind you why we keep believing in people. Before we begin, if stories like this move you, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because there are so many more waiting to be told. Daniel Cole had learned, over the last 4 years, that grief does not announce itself. It simply moves in and rearranges the furniture of a person's life until nothing feels the way it used to. He ran a small diner on the corner of 5th and Miller, a place with cracked vinyl booths and a bell above the door that never rang quite right. He opened at 5 every morning and closed at 9 every night, and in between those hours he served coffee, flipped eggs, and tried not to think too hard about the life he used to have before it all fell apart. To the regulars, Daniel was simply the quiet man who ran the diner, polite, hardworking, a little guarded, but always fair. Nobody in town knew that 7 years earlier, before the accident that took his wife and left him raising their daughter Maya alone, Daniel Cole had been an engineer with a rising career, a man with plans, a mortgage, a future mapped out in careful lines. Grief had stripped all of that away, piece by piece, until the only thing that remained was the diner his uncle left him and the daughter, who still called him her hero every single morning before school. On the Tuesday that changed everything, the bell above the door rang at exactly 3:10 in the afternoon, during the lull between lunch and dinner when the diner was nearly empty. Daniel looked up from the counter he was wiping down and saw a woman standing frozen just inside the entrance, her hand still resting on the door as though she might change her mind and leave. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, in a wrinkled school uniform, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed nearly off. The woman's name was Claire Bennett, though Daniel would not learn that until later. She looked like someone who had not slept properly in weeks. Dark circles beneath her eyes, a coat that was expensive but wrinkled, as if she had slept in her car more than once. She glanced around the diner, seemed to steady herself, and then walked toward the counter with the kind of forced composure that Daniel recognized immediately because he had worn that same expression himself in the year after the accident. "Can I get you something?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice easy, the way he always did with nervous customers. Claire didn't answer right away. She glanced down at her daughter, who was staring up at Daniel with wide, curious eyes, and then back at Daniel himself, as though she were measuring him against some invisible checklist only she could see. Finally, she asked if they could sit down, and Daniel, sensing this was not an ordinary request, untied his apron and led her to the corner booth where the afternoon light fell in long amber stripes across the table. It took Claire nearly 10 minutes to say what she had come to say, and when she finally did, Daniel understood why. Her daughter Sophie had a school event in 4 days, a father-daughter heritage day, where every child was asked to bring the most important man in their life to share a story about family. Sophie's father had left when she was 2 years old and had not been seen since. For years, Claire had managed to steer Sophie around the subject, but this year, for the first time, Sophie had come home in tears, terrified that she would be the only child standing alone in the gymnasium while every other father sat proudly beside their daughter. Claire had exhausted every option she could think of. Her own father had passed away 2 years prior. Her brother lived 3 states away and could not get time off work on short notice. She did not have a boyfriend, a close male friend, anyone she trusted enough to ask for something so strange and so important. And then, 3 days ago, she had come into Daniel's diner for the first time, ordered a coffee she barely touched, and watched him from across the room as he crouched down to tie the shoelaces of a little boy whose own mother was too overwhelmed with 3 younger children to notice. Something about the way he did it, patient, unhurried, like the boy mattered more than anything else in that moment, had stayed with her. "I know how this sounds," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table without yet explaining what was written on it. "I'm asking a stranger to pretend to be my daughter's father for one day. I'll pay you, I'll explain everything to the school if it ever comes up. I can't let her stand up there alone. Not this year." Daniel did not reach for the paper. He looked at Claire for a long moment, then at Sophie, who was tracing circles on the table with her finger, pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. He thought about Maya, his own daughter, and how devastated she would be to stand alone in a room full of fathers. He thought about the year after his wife died, when a neighbor he barely knew had shown up at his door with a casserole and stayed to help him fold laundry without being asked, simply because she could see he was drowning. "Tell me why," Daniel finally said. Not why she needed a father for the day, that much was clear. He wanted to know why him, why, out of every man in this town, she had chosen a diner owner she had spoken to exactly twice. Claire's eyes filled with tears she was clearly fighting to hold back. She told him that in 11 years of being a single mother, she had learned to read people quickly, out of necessity, out of self-protection. And in the 2 times she had watched him work, patient with difficult customers, gentle with children, never once raising his voice even when a man had shouted at him over a wrong order. She had seen something she rarely saw anymore. She had seen safety. And that, she said, was worth more to her than any qualification a stranger could offer. Daniel sat with that for a long moment. He thought about how easy it would be to say no, to tell her this was not his responsibility, to go back behind the counter and let the moment pass like 100 other moments that had asked more of him than he had left to give. But he thought too about Sophie's small hands still fidgeting nervously in her lap, and about Maya, and about every version of himself that had once needed someone to simply show up. "One day," Daniel said finally, "I'll do it. But I want to meet Sophie properly first, not just walk in on Friday as a stranger pretending to know her." Over the next 3 days, something unexpected happened. Daniel began stopping by Claire's small apartment after closing the diner. Not for long, just 20 or 30 minutes, enough time to learn Sophie's favorite color, the name of her stuffed rabbit, which she'd cryptically named Colonel Fluff, and the fact that she wanted to be a marine biologist because she loved octopuses more than any other creature on Earth. Maya came along on the second visit, cautious at first, then delighted to discover that Sophie shared her exact same obsession with a cartoon about talking dinosaurs. By the third visit, the 2 girls were inseparable, drawing pictures together at the kitchen table while Claire and Daniel talked quietly nearby. 2 adults who had both learned, the hard way, how heavy life could get when you carried it alone. Claire learned things about Daniel too, though he offered them carefully in small pieces, the way a man does when trust has to be rebuilt, one conversation at a time. She learned about the accident. She learned that Daniel had once had a very different life, one with a corner office and a 5-year plan, before all of it collapsed into a single, terrible afternoon on a rain-slicked highway. She learned that the diner was never his dream, only his uncle's, but that he had kept it running because Maya needed stability more than he needed ambition. Claire found herself thinking, more than once, that grief had not hollowed this man out. It had simply rearranged what he considered important. Heritage Day arrived on a bright Friday morning, and the gymnasium at Lincoln Elementary was filled with the noise of 100 proud families. Daniel stood near the entrance in a shirt he had ironed twice, more nervous than he had been in years, and felt a small hand slip into his. Sophie looked up at him with an expression so trusting, so hopeful, that Daniel felt something in his chest tighten in a way he had not expected. "You ready?" he asked her. "Are you going to tell them the story we practiced?" Sophie asked, gripping Colonel Fluff tightly in her other hand. "Every word," Daniel promised. When it was their turn, Daniel stood beside Sophie in front of the class and told a story. Not a fabricated tale of fatherhood, but a true story about courage, about a little girl who loved octopuses because they could change into anyone they needed to be to survive, and who was, in Daniel's words, the bravest person he had met in a very long time. He never claimed to be her father. He introduced himself honestly as a friend of the family who Sophie had asked to stand beside her, and the room, rather than judging the unconventional arrangement, seemed to lean in with quiet respect. Several other parents later admitted they had never seen a more genuine tribute all morning. Afterward, in the parking lot, Claire thanked Daniel with tears in her eyes, insisting on paying him despite his refusals. Daniel told her gently that some things could not be paid for, and that watching Sophie's face light up on that stage had been payment enough. But as he turned to walk to his car, Sophie ran up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, refusing to let go, and asked the question that neither adult had quite prepared for. "Can you come to my birthday too, even though it's not just one day?" Daniel looked over Sophie's head at Claire, who was watching him with an expression somewhere between hope and hesitation, unwilling to ask for more than she already had. And in that moment, Daniel understood that what had begun as a single favor, a one-day arrangement between two strangers trying to protect their children from disappointment, had quietly become something neither of them had planned for. In the months that followed, the arrangement that was never supposed to last beyond one Friday afternoon slowly became a permanent part of both families' lives. Daniel and Maya began having dinner with Claire and Sophie twice a week, then 3 times, until the distinction between visiting and belonging blurred entirely. Maya, who had spent 4 years as an only child navigating grief alongside her father, found in Sophie the sister she had quietly wished for. Claire found in Daniel a steadiness she had almost forgotten was possible. And Daniel, who had spent so long believing his role in life was simply to survive each day for Maya's sake, discovered that healing sometimes arrives disguised as someone else's request for help. A year later, on the same Heritage Day at Lincoln Elementary, Daniel stood in that same gymnasium, in a shirt ironed only once this time, because he no longer felt the need to prove anything. Beside him stood both girls, and beside them stood Claire, who reached for his hand without hesitation, the way people do when a bond has stopped being an arrangement and become simply their life. Sophie no longer needed to ask him to come. He was already there, the way he had been for months, the way he intended to be for as long as both families needed him. What began as a single desperate favor between two strangers became proof of something Daniel had forgotten in the years since he lost his wife, that family is not always built from blood or timelines or plans that go according to schedule. Sometimes it is built from a single question asked by a nervous mother in a quiet diner, and a single honest answer from a tired man who chose, against every instinct towards self-protection, to say yes. He never took it back. And in the years that followed, he never once wished that he had.